Recording will start soon. Thought it was supposed to beep, bing bong or something like this. Anyways, feels like it's live now.
Looks like
Yeah, I'm in a pretty good mood, man. So, bunch of my dev environment stuff for this one project that has a lot of traditional web service-y things currently fronted by Apache, but then also has some stuff it wants to integrate with that you've got a reverse proxy, and that stuff wants WebSocket. This is all stuff we have chatted about, right? Now Caddy slides in and solves all my problems. I'm not running two web servers, or in some cases, I'm not running Nginx in the front, then Apache and stuff like this. So it's all just like one thing, much easier. But I had this problem, and this seemed not intuitive to me at all. But Caddy uses the reverse proxy before it tries files in the file system.
interesting. Okay.
So the directive reverse proxy takes precedence over the directive file server. Yeah. So, and then I found like a bunch of blog posts about this, and this on how to handle it. And so, I mean, my case was very simple. I wanted it to handle the root of the server request to my local index.html. And I had 3 other routes that all start with the same prefix that I wanted to route into these like 3 different PHP scripts. That just the service that exists that's running, behind there that we're proxying to. We're trying to have like a nice integrated one-click link to get in there, but you need to authenticate to it with the right host name and all the shit. So what we have is these little PHP scripts. You go and you get routed in from our existing service with your fancy JWT that we know and trust. Boom, it bounces you over there with one of those tokens. We know who you are. We then use some quick PHP to make sort of the same looking web requests to the proxy service itself that looks like your browser from your IP, because it's all, well, not from your IP, but from this to establish a session to that backend machine, and it gives us a bunch of cookies. Then we use the PHP to set the cookie in the browser. Then we route them over to the normal landing page of that service, and they're in, and they're like, oh, everything works awesomely, right? It's seamless to the end user. And so those auth scripts were easy. I just said, oh, everything that's /auth goes to, so I put some rewrite rules or a thing in there. So it goes to the FCGI thingamajig, sorted. But then just the root of the site was always going into the reverse proxy. So I had to just make another handle path. I said handle path /. So if you just hit /, it just does file server. And then I have another handle block after that that is handle wax star. And wax star gets all reverse proxy. And that was like a bit easier than some of the gyrations that other folks had to go through. And then I also did find in the global config of Caddy, there's an option for order, and you can say, oh, try files before reverse proxy. And you can like reorder how it does that rules of evaluation. But it's like, it's basically like, oh, we have this. It has to be done in a certain way. And we've sort of hard coded that into the system. It's not like what I really wish it was doing was interpreting it in the order it was listed in the config file.
Right.
You had a file server above reverse proxy. That means do the file server and try files before doing reverse proxy.
Right. Yeah, I think it seemed pretty clear when we were looking at the configs that it was not following order. You could just put them in whatever order. It was going to have its own determination for order, because otherwise well, it's either one or the other. It's either deterministic or it's not, and it's not.
Yeah, it kind of like, it's a bit of a turnoff.
Yeah,
because I mean, pretty much everything else I look at, you read it top down and it basically runs top down. Lots of config files work that way, and you define something early and then you can use it later.
Yeah. I've gotten so used to, working with Chef and Puppet over the years, right, where you cannot make that assumption because it has its own, Chef and Puppet both have some version of a 3-pass. There's a variable fill out stage, there's a compilation stage, and then there's another, then there's kind of an execution stage, and there might be a 4th pass. And so that config that you look at is never the thing that's actually run and rendered. So I've gotten so used to that, I never assume it.
Just another little thing to frustrate you, I think.
and it's like there's all good reasons for it to happen that way, but it does create frustration. Sometimes it makes me want a nice go-to control flow.
Just put a go-to in there. What could possibly go wrong?
Yep.
What the fuck is this? Sorry. Trying to click through some stuff to show off some Aider, man. How does Aider work? What does it do? Why would I want to use it?
Well, so I mean, there's lots of talk about Cursor and some of the other tools giving you an IDE, giving you the LLM. I hate to call it AI tooling, but available inside your IDE, right?
Yeah.
I'm not a huge IDE fan. I use lots of different editors. I'm heavily in Sublime, which I suppose is probably an IDE, but it's not. And
it's just I don't like IDE either. I'm sort of with you, but I do like having a super fancy text editor.
Yes, exactly. Right. And Sublime gives me a super fancy text editor. I can use VS Code and get the same super fancy text editor stuff, but it tends to lend more toward IDE. And then you have stuff like Cursor, who says, well, we're going to give you our own custom build of VS Code that does our stuff because we couldn't do enough. But it's tied integrating it into your development workflow, right? And that's probably good for the right kinds of people and the right kinds of projects. It's just not me. I'd like to do a lot of control of my own tools. When I'm writing code with LLMs, a lot of the times I'm doing the bad thing where I'm just copy and pasting stuff from the chat windows.
Right in there.
Partly because I'm always doing a lot of different things. Something that I recognize that when true software engineers are using these tools, they're sitting there in a project of one type of code. And any particular day I might be working on 7 different languages.
Well, I mean, I don't know. I had to work on web stack stuff. And so my daily is shell scripts for tooling, Perl scripts for tooling, Python scripts for tooling, Python scripts for the app, PHP scripts for the app, Golang for the app, fucking JavaScript everywhere.
Exactly, right?
So that's 5 or 6, right?
Because you're stuck in full stack land.
I mean, I try to tell people that, I guess that's what I've been doing the whole time is I'm working on small teams. So, like at a big company, the last time I was there, which was quite some time ago, right? I worked on one component or sets of components in one app stack. Like I worked at a bank, and occasionally I would get drawn into some other project on some other part of the thing, ACH processing for a little bit, you go, help out with this project. But you're there for like 3 or 4 weeks just providing some technical assistance to another team or to, other technical people who are just, not having enough experience. So you hang out, right? You guide them up on getting the whatever. But I spent like 3 years every day in ASP 3.0, ASP Classic, moving to .NET, web app for reverse loan origination. Like that's all it was. Like,
yeah.
And so that was my big experience. Oh, I'm working on one app, and I'm actually only working on a few components of the one app, right? Like, who knows all about its flood integration with like HUD and the other thing? Hell yeah, So, but for the last 15 years, it's been working at a small business or working at an early stage business where everything you have to do is the 300% problem. Oh, help us deploy. Well, we got to do this, and we got to do this, and we got to do this.
Well, and so the other side of it is that when you're in that like development life cycle where you're working inside a product, inside a project continuously and consistently, you set up your tooling, you're sitting there local, you have test environments, test tooling, all of this stuff's already built and existing for you. A lot of what I do is not in those types of situations. I suspect you too, right? I might be SSH into somebody else's server and then SSH into another server past that and another server past that just to get to the thing that I'm trying to work on.
Sometimes you have to apply to the facility to go because...
Yeah. And so that idea of let me fire up my IDE, I mean, even with VS Code, with its SSH connection stuff, which I have used heavily before, it still requires work to integrate it and tie it to that. And in fact, permission to execute it and do all these things. A lot of times we'll just SSH in and use VI or Emacs or Nano or whatever your favorite command line editor is, shell-based editor is, and you don't have access to any of that stuff. What Aider gives you is that LLM integration functionality in the shell.
So show us.
So this is not a web project. This is the thing that I'm currently wanting to build. So this is what I tackled as an example here. Let's see if I can present this here.
Well, tell us, what's this fancy thing you want to build?
This screen. So what I've been working on recently is, I built a tool for extracting the data from a wideband sensor. So it's an oxygen sensor for cars, right? And it's used for testing and tuning, fuel injection or carburetors. In this case, carburation, right? So measuring the actual output of the exhaust and using that to rejet the carburetors. The tool comes with some really old, really crappy Windows software that does stuff and gives you some really ugly graphs. And I ended up, I'm on Mac, so I don't even have a Windows machine. So I ended up building a wine pipeline in Docker to run their tool to do a data export into CSV. So now I have the CSV, but I don't have any graphing tools for it. So I had to build a custom graphing tool because it's got its own format, right? The CSV has multiple sessions in it, all this stuff. I'm not going to show that. Imagine a tool that does graphing, right? It shows graphs. But I also realized that as I go out, make a pull, come back with data, make some notes. I need to, and then I'll take some screenshots. And then of course I pass this over to my custom GPT that I'm using that has a lot of knowledge about how to tune these specific cars and engines. And so I'm back.
GPT do that?
Because I created a custom GPT with all of that information. So I loaded in a bunch of forum threads, the last 20, 25 years of forum threads and web posts that have that information in the GPT. So I'm kind of going back and forth between my graphs. So my tool allows me to easy copy paste my screenshot or screenshot my graph, feed it back into the GPT. But now I really need something to manage the larger scope of this. Now I have lots of log files. I have the original source log files, the D32 files. I have the CSV files that are output from that. And then I have notes associated with each of these runs, like what did I do? How did it feel? what does the interpretation of the graph data show us, right? And so I would like to have a tool to kind of manage that. Say, here I'm working on my 66 bus. We're doing this in March of 2025. And, this is the carburetor that I'm running at the moment. And here are the passes. So we can see that evolution of change in one place, right? As I go from it's way rich and now it's way lean. And now maybe we get it on target. So I want a tool to just manage all of that stuff. And so that's where I started. So I started with GPT, just wrote down some ideas of what I wanted to do, right? It's going to be Python. It's going to GUI. A lot of Python GUI tools. I've never written any kind of GUI, so this is the first time for me.
Really?
Except for that graphing tool, which was really just using MATLAB.
That doesn't count.
So I've never built any GUI tools ever in my life. I mean, unless you count HTML, and who counts HTML? But I didn't want to build it as a web interface because this is, it's an experiment. And so a lot of Python stuff with GUIs tends to require special builds of Python. So it would mean going and rebuilding Python, getting Pyver to rebuild it, or doing a custom build of the homebrew install or something to have the thing. So I found with some GPT experimentation that there was and this is a prototype in this chat of just a single button layout, but using PySide 6, I guess. Mm-hmm. I didn't have to install anything other than, PySide 6, I guess. But so that was kind of my constraint is I wanted to be a GUI. I wanted to be able to use this, and I want to not have to install anything that I can't just pip install. I actually use a custom runner for Python that will look at a requirements file or look at the imports and do the installs. So it makes it a lot faster to iterate around this stuff. It sets up all the virtual environment for me completely on its own. So then I kind of described, what we were talking about. It needs to ingest CSV files. It's going to have more than one session or more than one file per session, because there might be 2 or 3 runs that I want to consolidate as a single discussion, have my notes around it. And that's because of the eccentricities of the physical tool and how it writes data out. And so, there's a ChatGPT conversation where we kind of come up with some ideas of what it should do, and eventually get through some experiments, come out with what I think is a spec that I can give back to another GPT to create this. But it turns out it really ignored it. So I had to come back, and GPT suggested the idea of calling it a functional spec and building out less assumption, right, about what it should have. And we ended up with this much larger, let's see, what was the last one here? We end up with this larger spec here that tries to kind of boil it down, gives us a GUI, gives us a representation of what it ought to look like.
Right.
It is right. I didn't want to use a database, so I just wanted to put files in the dump file system because, hey, why not? We can always
file system anyway.
We can always SQLite it or Berkeley DB it later if we wanted to. But this gives me that flexibility of I don't have to have the tool to explore the data later. So if I just stick it in my notes folder, it's fine. Because last time I did this 13 years ago, I realized I have no data. I had a few very sketchy notes, and that was all that survived. So I'm wanting this to last longer. So when I do this in 10 years again, I can come back to this and look at it. So that's sort of the goal. So built out this spec. So what I've done, just created a simple repo. This has got my proof of concept GUI in it. Requirements file for that, and drop the spec in here. So we'll fire up Aider. Actually, I'm going to use the slightly slower, the lot slower 03 Mini model here. Could use Claude model.
So Aider, you're just in a terminal with Aider.
Just in a terminal with Aider.
Love it. And is it local, or it's going to make API calls out to 03? It
is going to make API calls. I'm using GPT for this. It works with Claude. It works with Gemini. I believe you can use local LLMs if you find the right setup.
Like using Is it reading your whole repo?
It right now it's looking at it. All it's done is looked at what in basically the .get file. I'm going to add now. There's lots of config. I am not an expert with this tool. So let's see my POC, my requirements. Oops. All right. So now it knows it has those 3 files in its context, plus knowledge of the general structure of the file system and what's in Git. Right. So I'm just going to tell it to view the spec, build the implementation. My prompts are easy. I just tell it to do things. It does not have a spinner, and with the models that talk to themselves, so they're a lot slower to respond. This like 01, 03, then this lack of spinner gets a little annoying because you're like, did it break? So now we wait.
Oh, now we're doing the waiting.
Now we're doing the waiting. And now it's doing the coding.
It is barfing out like a lot of code.
And create new file. So we'll go ahead and let it run the file. So you notice it did use my runner.
Manager.
And
wait a second. Did that the thing it produced?
This is the thing it just produced.
And what was your it barf? That is all of the
that is produced from this spec file right here.
You just wrote spec. And okay, so and that was like some of the files that you already had.
There were no files.
Well, where did spec come from?
I created the spec file. Sorry, I created the spec file, and I had that proof of concept, which was just a button GUI, right? So it knew that this is the way we want the implementation of the GUI to start from.
Okay, and then go back to your terminal there. So you did that. Did you tell it like load spec or something? Sorry.
Yeah. So we added back to the right place here.
Add spec something.
Too far back in shell history. Here we go. Yeah. So basically, we just added the spec. So we add spec, add POC GUI.
Files. Below is the proposed. Oh, now then you told. So you added this stuff. It added this stuff. It barfed out some info. Then you said, do some work. Review the spec. Build my shit.
Yep.
And then it went blah blah blah. Told you something nice, and then has some weird delimiter. It looks like.
Yeah, it uses a patch file style. It's similar to a patch file type implementation.
Yeah, sure. That's
in its
good enough.
Structure of response, so that way it can update files, and it applies that back to Git. I have auto commit turned off. Auto commit's kind of useful. It's kind of bad depending on how you feel about it. Changing your stuff all the time.
I hate changing my stuff all the time.
So I can manually commit instead. This is what it created. I don't really know where logs came from. It's not really a car. If we look in the
probably mentioned that you want some log files somewhere, man.
I see what's happened. It's looked at the existing logs directory, which is not committed. I'm guessing that's what happened, and decided maybe that's a thing. But it's supposed to create. In theory, it should be creating a directory that has the tree underneath it, right? But let's see if we add a car, what happens? Yeah, it's just creating it's just doing the directory. It ignored some of it, and it just did it here. So inside test 1, we have an empty session. Let's add a session.
Okay, so this is neat. Do you think it's going to actually work?
Some of it's going to work. Let's see if it did anything. So it hasn't actually saved any of this. So this is something I saw when I was doing the prototypes, that it didn't necessarily remember that the stuff's supposed to get saved. So I will just close this. Now, one of the things I'm going to ask it to do is to add logs so that everything that I do in the GUI gets logged. That way, when it runs it, it can consume the output. It can see what I'm doing. Because I haven't found a way to give aider, unlike ChatGPT, I can't give aider screenshots. Because otherwise, I could just give it a screenshot, throw some arrows on it, and say, "Hey, this is stupid. This should do this. This should do this." Right? That's what I would do inside ChatGPT.
So
I do
Aider
that.
doesn't do that.
But Aider, I haven't. It might have a way. I honestly haven't even looked. So there's no point in adding this output. So okay, a few updates. Let's add print logging everywhere the GUI is interfaced with, so that you can see what I'm doing. Also, the data tree is supposed to be in its own directory.
I've noticed that with these things too, you can like typo all kinds of stuff and it still knows what you're on about.
It does.
I found that like to be very, very helpful, and still seems to be. And this may just be the engine that you decided to use, but it comes around and is saying things like, you know, I don't know, it's generating all the stuff that I've asked it to do. It seems to be able to get around it without too much BS. I can't believe it, really.
So those are the things that I noticed. We need to add some logging so it knows what I'm doing. That the data was supposed to be creating a tree. It was supposed to be creating a tree, a directory tree for all of that stuff. It didn't do that, so let's call it LM2 data. And that, you know, the text fields did not update. Like I added notes and added a session title. It didn't create the session JSON that I sort of expected from the spec. So probably it wanted a save button, but it didn't bother to implement a save button. So let's see what it does next. Interesting, it added something in logs too. Oh, it did. It stuck it down there. Oh, because it treated that. I created a new car, added notes to the car, but it didn't associate it with the right one. It left it with that logs car because it's just looking at directories, right? Because it's not looking at directories. Let's see what happens. I have used this tool in an existing code base where I really didn't feel like spending the time to explore it. So here it created some stuff, it lented it, it failed the lent. It says, okay, I'll go fix the lent. Let's see what happens when it runs. Oh, that's funny. It launches a shell, so it gets my login, gets my little fortune from my login script. Okay, what did I do with it? There it is. And so there's no cars, no sessions. Let's see. We created an LM2 data folder. Awesome. Add a car. Okay. Add a car. Add a session. Oops, select a car. Good. It made me select a car. Good. Not really sure on why we have a name and a title, but we'll run with it. Notes.
It's because your spec's terrible.
Yeah, I know, right?
I mean, I don't know, man. When the project doesn't work out, the UI doesn't match what you think it should do, go back and look at the spec. This is why all really good managers don't write anything down. That way, they're never wrong.
So it doesn't seem to be saving the data here. Because it allowed me to fill out these fields, but I didn't have a session selected. Title, notes, and it still didn't give me a way to add these files. So that's a whole nother thing. But okay, so now I added notes, and it did save them. More notes. More notes. So it is, that part's working. All right, so okay, add that to the chat. Shouldn't be able to fill out the third panel if a session's not selected. And there's no way to add D32 CSV files. I mean, and then like this is, let's call it 70% of what I need, right? And now it's just go through, figure it out, iterate on it. I've never even touched the code, looked at the code, right? I haven't even had to debug a problem yet.
Wow, that's wild.
I mean, this is 03 mini, so it's pretty good. This isn't 03 high, 03 mini high, or 03 high, or whatever. And it's a pretty decent coder. It's better than the GPTs and than like 4.0 and stuff. But it's slower, but mostly because you end up with a couple of different developers to do it. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and run that tool. Python. Which it didn't prompt me. Sometimes it prompts me for, and sometimes it doesn't, and I don't feel like typing this. All right, so now it runs it. Okay, cool. No, so it's session selected, test session, add a file, grab one of our CSVs. So now we have it here. Double click to run it. So it would run the graphing tool, which I don't have, but this is the proof of concept. It would run that graph. Okay, we're missing a way to add screenshots. Okay, it's not letting me update some of these fields. But I mean, this is programming in today's world.
Maybe.
I mean, and I'm not a programmer, so no.
I mean, I think that was a pretty good use of the tool. I was looking around at Aider. It turns out Paul Gauthier, something, makes these Docker images so you can do the thing in Docker.
Ah, cool.
So you don't have to get a contaminated Python environment. Contaminated, for lack of better term.
Sure, which is what I from executing all the code. That's where I use a Python for that does all the virtual environment stuff set up for me automatically. So similar, but it just does it in a VM.
So if I go to CD project, touch, test, let's make their test GTK. No, it's not that. It's called TK9. Have you ever seen, do you like Golang?
I mean, I use Go when I need to. It's not one of my go-tos.
Oops, I pasted the link into the chat 2 times for you. Package TK 9.0 is a CGO free platform GUI toolkit for Go. Gives you like TK stuff.
Yeah. I thought about doing this with Go, but I was like, let me just go start with Python because that's how I built the graphing side of it already. So, and what I want to do is I want to integrate the graphing stuff into this. Like next step, whereas right now it just runs a shell script or would run a shell script, run a shell command with the CSV file to graph it. I'd like it to integrate that functionality into it, especially because now since I have a GUI framework, I can control the graphing GUI better than just using, I think it's MATLAB that it's using, which provides its own GUI, but it's fairly constrained in what I can do with it. But it does give me zoom functionality and backing up and forth and scaling and labels and all the things you would want to see in a graphing tool. But yeah, I mean, it's certainly possible to actually, you know what? Let's be painful.
Okay. So I've actually tried this TK9 in GPT, ChatGPT, and I got nothing.
Yeah.
It ended up telling me how to do. It didn't pick this thing, but it was telling me how to do a bunch of other GTK stuff.
Okay.
Which wasn't this thing, TK9.
I mean, this is published in March 2025, so right, we might have to go give it some
very new.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And this is where, when this is the nice thing about documentation that is in one file, is that means that if I need to, I can't, but it has gone and it's writing something. If I need to, I can just take this whole thing and go feed it back to the LLM and say, here's the documentation for that thing. When they break it up into a bunch of files, that's painful, right? Okay, so it says I can go build. Now, I don't
Wait,
remember...
it says you want to create the new file.
Oh yes.
I gotta create the file.
Yep,
Run the shell command? Why not?
Run the build and no recorded modules. Add the output. Let's see what.
So let's see. Hold on, and then it barfed something out.
Yeah, it's because it's doing a login shell, so it's firing up my fortune every time. My fortune triggers on login shells. I don't know why it's using a login shell, but there it is.
Oh,
I'm sure that's not going to contaminate my chat history at all.
I feel like it might.
Let's see. But yeah, I mean, it suggested we should just go build and then we should run it, but it hadn't paid attention to the output. Let's see. Go mod, go build, go mod tidy. And
Go mod download TK9 TK. Dude, is that the right thing?
GitHub TK9. There's the repository. Nope.
modernc.org TK9.
Ooh, we can go scrape web. Let's see.
Hey, oh, Playwright. I noticed that on the Docker download, you can do regular or you can do Aider full that comes with a whole bunch of stuff.
Yeah, and I just have a pip install, so that's all I did with this one. And it's not this isn't running inside its own virtual environment or anything. I probably could have, should have, but actually, no. This is a homebrew install. It was a homebrew install. It's updated a couple of times. On a customer machine when I was using this heavily for a project, I did something more isolated, wrapped it inside a virtual environment, did everything there. And I think the Aider team have released some tooling around dynamic virtual environments specifically for use with Aider so that you can run Aider in that isolated environment with your own version of Python and all the things. But I haven't explored it.
Well, I just ran Aider from the Docker and it said, here's the thing, open documentation. I hit yes, but it didn't do anything. Probably because it's like trying to silently launch a browser in the back end.
Yeah, could be.
Connecting to a thing, configuring API keys. The easiest way is to say Aider model something.
So proposed changes to switch the code over to TK90 from the GitLab repository imported from, which removes the old GitLab TK9 TK dependency. So there we go. See what happens. And some failures. Repository not found. Because that's not going to work. Come on.
Aider chat has LLM leaderboards to tell you like who's working. Benchmark 225 coding exercises. They were picked to be hard, a strong coding challenge. It's telling you like who's doing the best. Gemini 2.5 Pro EXP 0325 is performing the best, followed by Claude 3.7 Sonnet, followed by DeepSeek, followed by 03 Mini High. Who's the worst? GPT 4.0 Mini.
Oh, yeah. Well, that makes sense.
100% using the correct edit format. 3% actually correct.
doing some sort of conversion on D32s, which is not actually happening. So I don't know what it's doing.
Cool. Rocket ship icon and everything is in there. This is neat.
All right, let's see how's the go happening. Go build, see what happens.
I'm very surprised that this thing grabbed up TK90 though, which is pretty awesome.
We had to feed it a little bit, right? We had to know enough to tell it to try this thing. We had to know enough to tell it where the repo was, but it was able to go look at the repo, so that was kind of awesome. All right, we got some more fails. But the Python version is, I mean, like, this is if my screenshot thing would open my screenshots and show them to me. It's my import for the CSVs is converting the converting the D32s to CSV, which was in a spec at some point, but I tried to remove it because the idea was that it would run the tool. But I don't. So it's trying to run the tool. I don't know exactly what the hell it's doing, or what it's coming up with to do this, because that really kind of shouldn't happen. But oops, I lost my window. And but that's some good functionality. Some notes. It's updating it every time. Switch over to the other one. More notes.
Wow.
Add a CSV file. I mean, that's a lot of what I wanted. I mean, I want the notes field to be bigger. I want or a pop out, maybe have some full markdown support. But this gives me one place, and now if I look at my data, there's the sessions. I think that might need some help. I don't know why it's. I think those session folders need to be named based on their actual session. It's like creating names for them. What? Oh, yeah, okay, yeah. Right. And then note screenshots, session JSON. Files. So did it actually put files in there? Went to raw. Okay, it did retain the D32 even though it tried to convert it. And that one, this is probably the conversion, the one it converted, because these are the real things, about 147K or 1.4 megs. Go build. Yeah, it's not as good at Go as it is Python. But we kind of know that.
These folks at whoever this modernc.org is also has TK9 VNC, and you can basically like build one of these TK9 apps and then client uses a web page, no VNC.
Why is it keep giving me a slash? I'm not copying that with a slash.
No, modernc isn't a real website.
Yeah, apparently it just redirects back here
over to there, but its redirector is like not the right query string in there. There's like a Twitter and a GitLab. That's like all you have. Yeah, that's not the right link.
Goes to GoDoc, right? Yeah. And then GoDoc takes you to
package.go.dev/search == modernc.
So whoever these guys are, they've got some stuff, but also
it's called modernc, but it's all in Go, which I think is fantastic. Got a bunch of different themes. Like, you can do a lot with this thing.
Why is the modern C the name that's coming to mind? Like somebody else was talking about this recently. I think is it part of the let's replace C or let's replace C++, let's rework C++.
I have no idea about that. There's very little detail about whoever modernc.org is.
Yeah.
The GitLab page for this stuff is light on details. I mean, I don't know if you pay attention to. No, it's going to be CZNIC, CZNIC.
And I'm going to be
Are
studying.
you even a human? Are you even a human, bro?
GitLab thinks I am not a human. I can almost never get logged into GitLab anymore.
It's fucking Cloudflare, bro.
I know. Well, yes, but it's worse on GitLab. Whatever they've chosen is way worse. Yeah. So, yeah. But I'm not a human, so it's okay. I mean, right? It's okay to block me. I'm not even a paying customer. Oh, wait.
I was trying to be.
When GitLab first released, we tried really hard to stand up a local of it, but we were a CentOS 5 shop, and so we had to backport a bunch of the Ruby because it's just a big Rails app, and we had to backport a bunch of the stuff. And this is CentOS 5 era, right? So a lot of the tooling that we take for granted today did not exist. And none of us were Ruby developers. We weren't a Ruby shop. So we were a Unity and C++ and PHP shop. So figuring out how to get it working, but we did eventually get it working enough as a proof of concept. But man, it was a nightmare of bad code then.
I mean, GitLab works. I think anybody's code, we've sort of chatted about that before. Anybody's code, you get in there and it turns into a nightmare.
Yep.
One of the things, I think that just happens also for GitLab is that they are busy in there bolting on damn near every feature they can figure out what to bolt on.
Yeah.
And just keep and it frustrates me. It reminds me of like the startup who just thinks that if I add one more feature, then I'll go viral and get the flood of clients.
Right.
And it feels like that, or it feels like a manager needs to, you got to have something to show the people that write the checks. And GitLab, took outside money and is now publicly traded, so you can't just say like, oh, well, our team spent a whole bunch of time, improving the interoperability and the functionality of our code base, tweaking performance improvements, blah, blah, blah,
I remember when
like half-baked UI stuff that just smacks of, you guys threw that shit out there after whoever it was on the engineering side to build the thing said, oh, I'll just shove a prototype UI in right here and we'll be sure to fix it. We won't ship that. And then somebody else was like, yeah, let's ship that and just add some notes to the documentation that are also, incorrect. I love GitLab, but these seem to just be like classic mistakes. Just
right.
Classic mistakes, or
it's funny, right?
You have now mid-level managers who have to take activity to justify their existence. Like you could get rid of them and hire a UI UX person, and then actually listen to them. That second part, finding the UI UX person, not terribly difficult. Getting management who is ready to listen, I'll have to get a shovel.
Well, it's sort of funny because now that GitLab have restructured their pricing and made themselves more expensive than GitHub, I've worked with a bunch of teams now that are trying to or doing the move to GitHub, right? And they just sacrificed losing the things that the things that made GitLab unique because they've been bought by another company, and that company looks at them and says, well, great, but we're not going to renew your large purchase when we already have this one over here that we can roll you into, and it will cost a quarter,
right,
of what it would cost to pay that, because when what happens is you go from zero to like $10,000 a month or something, or $10,000, $20,000 a year at team scale. I forget. I don't pay attention. I look and forget. But those are the numbers that I see, right? And so, and then somebody buys you up and decides, well, we're just going to shut that down because we're already a GitHub shop.
right.
And like a lot of times, those teams would actually be okay with keeping it, except that it's not cost competitive. I mean, if they just matched GitHub's price, it would have at least been, but I don't know.
I think
not my business.
So the way that app is done, I mean, it's hard to tell that exactly because I'm not staring at their code right now, but a common pattern that I've observed is you get an app that's that complicated. So to maximize your sales, you start putting all these different features behind gates, a payment gate. Are you on single or solo mode? Are you on team mode? Are you on something, right? And so you put some type of policy or ACL gate in front of a whole bunch of these features. And it feels like when you go to that route and then folks just try to drive it towards the higher end of the pricing. And I look at that and I see, well, you've got these pay gate flags all over your fucking software already. Why don't you do some pay gates way down at the low end? And then, instead of having people leave or instead of having people overuse the free tier or like improperly use the free tier because, well, I was on the free tier. Now we have 6 people. We want some of those team features, but I'm immediately going to jump from $0 a month to, $115 a month or something.
Right. We go from $0 to $30, $0 for 5 users. At 6 users, we're now 30 times 6 per month.
Billed annually.
Right. And that's that's the you pay annually. Right.
Finding
their monthly flag is.
Well, here's some other weird pricing things down here.
And then there's all the add-ons, right? Oh, well, am I using that? Am I using that?
So I'm looking at this and saying, well, what if GitLab said you can have a free account for read-only stuff and you pay $1 a month per repo and you want to do this and this and this, and you have another user in your repo, like that user has to be a user that's paying us at least $1 a month.
Yep.
And I'm making up the numbers, right? Some MBA that works for GitLab could probably spreadsheet the shit out of this pretty quickly and just know that there is a significant percentage of the population that uses GitLab lightly, but you could get $2 or $3 from me. And the thing is like getting $300 from one person or getting $100 from 3 people or getting $3 from 100 people. You have 100 people and the lower price is regarded, and I don't know if it's entirely true, but is regarded as a easier ask. And I know of a non-zero amount of people who like GitLab as much as I like GitLab, but also aren't in the space where they can pay $70 or $80 a month for their thing, which is the next jumping off point. If you guys had a 5 and a 10 and a 50, there's a whole bunch of little players, and
that's who they started out after.
GitLab. Yeah. I'm sorry, GitHub now has some feature sets that changed because of pressure from GitLab. you know, and look at these pricing, $4. They have this lower tier thing, like get the, you know, and this was one of those things like, let's give all the kids free computers so that they're used to Microsoft Windows, get them indoctrinated in school, right?
And this isn't based on the number of customers or a number of people in your org who need access to your repo, right? This is just
$0, unlimited.
You want the extra things.
So.
You want to step up to the extra things. You need more of this. You need something here, right? I mean, it's straight linear progression. Then you move up to enterprise where you have all the features, which all comes because of, you know, somebody said we needed to be SOC something, and we wanted to do SAML, and so that's why you end up paying for this, and that's your premium. But that's your enterprise premium, right? A lot of teams don't ever need this stuff because this is pay per use. You know, once you get up past this, it's pay per use. This is available pay per use. This is everything most teams ever need at $4 a month.
Some people, huh? I don't know. I'd like to give GitLab a lecture about how to do it, but you know, I feel like maybe they're not ready to listen to me.
Well, I gave up and failed on the go, but I told it to create some notes about how it was running and what it was failing. Let's see, did it create that file? It said it created a file. I don't know. I don't see it. It said it was going to create one. Create this. Yes. Applied edit to.
LLM notes _go.
Oh, it put it in a okay, because it's in a folder. That's funny. It put it down here instead of next to the code.
Hell yeah, man! I love it.
But at least it's documented where the state of where it is, that it doesn't work, that there's some stuff to do, and okay, you can come back to this, right? Went back to the Python, had it make a change. Apparently, it didn't do the change yet, but whatever. But hey, we've certainly got a proof of concept here. And from this, I can finish it up and make it work. I can actually go look at the code once, which I haven't done yet. So
that's pretty awesome. So that's pretty impressive. And I was able to get Aider off of the Docker and sort of poke around with it. And I pointed it to a project, and you just like run it. I think the last little step I need to figure out is, can I run it with all of its things as a env file? I use this tool dir env.
Yeah,
love it, right? And so
yeah, it does take config as in .env, and it has its YAML config file in the home directory, and then there's the env stuff, and I think there's a conversion of the YAML that can live in the project file too. So you can set up more extensive config.
Yeah, the other thing you had to do on the Docker universe, if you're using Docker, is you have to have your git config in the project know your email and your git username.
So right, because it doesn't have
your home directory.
Yeah, it doesn't have access to your home directory. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, unless you did something and put all your magic sauce in your home directory, or just, you know, when you run the container,
because it's doing git inside the container. So
yeah, Docker, you do Docker run, and then you map your current user ID and group ID, and then you mount, you know, the instructions here is mount your currently working directory into /app in the container, and it does everything in that, you know, its work dir is /app. So, and then you just hand it a bunch of args, you know, -- OpenAI API key, et cetera, et cetera. So
right.
That is pretty dang cool. This says, screen recordings. Oh, that's not it, screen recording. That's some stuff I can watch. That is pretty dang cool, man. That was really neat. And then it all happens like from a nice little terminal window. And it seems like, or maybe I'm wrong, but it is becoming smart enough that it is it like loading up all of your code from your repo? So it
basically looks at the structure and makes some assumptions based on structure. Then if it thinks it needs to look at a file, it does a reasonably good job of prompting you and saying, "Would you like to add these files? Because I think that they're where I need to look." Or you can choose to add. You could add the entire repo. You'll just burn context that you're paying for, right? I mean, the entire session for all of that cost us 80 cents.
Wow.
Using O3 Mini too. So I mean, that's not like using their cheapest model or something. And then 80 cents for 40 minutes of work is maybe a lot, maybe not. Depends on how you look at it, I guess.
Well, that's another whole rant about how hard is it to figure out pricing for AI models. Pricing me based on tokens? What kind of shit is that? Like, what if my tokens are really valuable, right? What if, like, sometimes you write a simple Perl script and it's worth 30 grand. Sometimes you spend a lot of time writing a lot of Perl script and it's only worth 5 grand.
It's only worth the line noise it's written in.
Yeah. And so, there was a thing I had GPT do for me, and I got the whole thing done in about an hour, maybe a little less. And it was definitely something I could have done myself, just reading the spec for DER encoding. Can't remember that off the top of my head, but it's take the shit that you have and then pack it in a bunch of bytes that look like this. Just follow our spec when you pack the bytes together. And I can't remember that. Can't remember that stuff off the top of my head. And so I said, GPT, make me one of these things. And it gave me 4 not fully functional implementations. And I said, oh, try again, oh, try again, oh, try again. So when I say, oh, it gave me 4, I mean, I was like, oh, and you're supposed to use a SHA 512 hash. Don't you know that shit came out the first iteration with SHA 1?
Right.
I said, nah, SHA 512, please. And then it came out with that one, but it messed up some of the earlier mechanism for the encoding and was still, you needed to also encode which hash you were using in the encoded shit, and it was still encoding that as all 3 or 4 times it encoded the indicator said, oh, the hashing algorithm we're using is SHA 256. But the code that it gave me was alternating between picking SHA 1 and SHA 512. And I was telling it, give me SHA 512. So, it took me like, oh, okay. Gave me a bunch of usable code. I had to go and look up one thing on the internet and just say like, oh, here's how to properly pack these little bytes right here to indicate this is what I have. Now I'm done. All of that was an hour. And that means that would have been an hour of just communicating if I tried to outsource that to an Upwork, Odesk kind of gig.
Sure.
It would have been an hour of that. If I was the guy who was reading the reference material and putting it back together like from scratch, man, I probably could have spent all day on it.
Yep.
And instead, GPT, boom, I got that little chunk of code that all I really needed to do was for these things called a timestamp authority. I didn't have any code and couldn't find any code that we could use on this project that would let me do that in PHP on that project. I do a lot of that. I did a lot of that in the past, and then now, you get typecast, right?
Yep.
Well, you get typecast, but not in PHP because there's not really types. But what do they call it? I think they say it was like duck typing or something like that, or maybe that's what they say about JavaScript or something.
Right.
Oh, it does seem to have some more type-related stuff happening, both JS, and through TypeScript, and PHP through the changes and annotations in 8, whatever, man.
Or one of the things we always dealt with when we were bringing C developers into PHP land was teaching them all the things that PHP considered to be a true.
Oh yeah, basically everything.
Yeah, if it's set, it's true. If it's not set, it's false.
There's like 3 false values.
If it's a string, it's true, and then it's an empty string, and then it's false, and it's true and false. But there's true the string. The string called false is true.
Yeah, don't do that. Yeah, I think that's right. There's like 3 or 4 falsy things. False and null and 0, and then empty string also. And I think something else I see folks getting, just new devs in general, getting hung up on is in that PHP universe, the is set versus empty.
Oh yeah, right.
And then somebody else did something that I also feel like is not a good practice, but was putting query string parameters into the app, and the parameter was being handled on just whether or not it existed. And I look at a lot of web apps. I do a lot of web app shit. I'm staring at some of these web apps that this was one of the rare cases where I saw somebody doing something like that, I've seen it before when folks made their app have its own custom, very unique parameters being passed in, like what folks was doing way back in CGI bin days, and they're just, packing weird shit onto the URL and handing that into their script, and just letting Perl's regex handle everything. Cool. But this one, even when you look at what do the big dogs do, the Microsoft and Google apps and all of that, they've got a parameter, but it's a single, and they're using shorthand stuff that's just a single character or 2 characters for the parameter, and then it has a value 1. Okay, cool. Don't just do arg, make it say arg equals 1, because of whoever's reading it later, because of however it's being read later.
Yeah.
This was awesome. Thank you for the tour of Aider. And I looked to it, looks like it knows how to handle all the different languages that you might want to use. Latex in there.
Yeah, using the Claude models are the best programming models right now. So I think 3.7, Claude 3.7 or whatever is the best thing to use. I mostly use them for other things, so I try to not spend too much money on Claude.
Looks like it doesn't support Objective Camel. Boo. I mean, that's an edge case language. Anyways, they had another thing where they have their leaderboards and they're running these tests from a site called Exorcism. Exorcism. 225 different exercises. And it says 72.9% correct from Gemini 2.5 Pro using diff fenced versus diff versus architect versus hole patching versus other ways, I guess, of doing that. And they show costs, so you can kind of know what to expect, I think, from this thing before you even get it.
Yeah. And unlike Cursor and a lot of the other competitors, this one is open source and free.
Yeah.
So I could pay, I can pay Cursor $20. I mean, it's not free because I have to pay the LLMs.
You got to pay those things, but this Python utility that sits on top of them is $0.
Yep.
Yeah, I love it, man. That was awesome.
And I believe they had implemented, I don't know the current state, a web interface to it, which is one of the things I really wanted to see. I wanted to be able to have this, right? But I also wanted to be able to have a web interface where I could have a conversation, right? Not code driven, but conversation driven,
right,
in the context of the code. Because that's what I miss working in ChatGPT doing code, is that I can talk about it, solve problems, then we can get back to coding, and we have all of that conversation context. They created a web interface, but at least when I looked at it a couple of months ago, it wasn't that thing I wanted, but it is available. It might be, you might solve somebody else's problem. So
that's cool. Appreciate it. Well, I think that's it. I'm gonna cut.